one of the interesting things that I heard this weekend at CHAD was the notion that if you are combined typed or have hyperactive, the presentation of ADHD, that really is your system is in hyperarousal, and that hyperarousal can be a factor for the experiences that RSD, that people sort of group together, and that there has been really good results for people adding a non-stimulant to their stimulant medication in managing that hyperarousal, because it can help with things like instead of having 3 to 5 thoughts coming at once, you're having one thought and it's the thought that you want. And so that would be one aspect of it. But then there's also that it does help a bit with the emotional regulation that people can sort of feel like is RSD.
ADHD Rewired, episode 353. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups, and you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. We have a big panel today for our November live Q&A that you are hearing in December on the podcast. So let's just get this thing started. Let's first say hello to all of our panelists. Let's start with Brendan from ADHD Essentials.
How's it going?
It's going. And next up, we got...
I'm excited for such a big panel.
I know.
I dig it that it keeps growing.
It keeps growing. The network is growing. And we got Will from Hacking Your ADHD.
Hey there, everybody. Glad to be here.
Glad that you are here. And just so listeners know, Will in November is wearing a fantastic ugly Christmas sweater. And it's wonderful. He's backing up for all the listeners to see. And there's... And then there's Moira Maybin.
Hello. My podcast will be starting in January, and it's called The ADHD Friendly Lifestyle.
Love it. And next and last, we have MJ Siemens.
Howdy doody.
Is that the name of your podcast? We should probably talk about that if it is.
So, same thing in January, we'll be launching a podcast called ADHD Diversified, and it's going to focus a bit more on, kind of finding the people in the Asian community who are ADHD, giving voice, to the community, telling stories that, hopefully, they can relate to, that we can relate to as a whole, and just show that, hey, there's no shame in having ADHD, no matter where you are and where you're from, because we're all allowed to ADHD, however we do.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We have our first question here with Hassan, who's joining us live. Hi, Hassan.
Hi, everyone. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. All right. What is your question?
Okay. So a quick thank you to everybody. I'll try to keep it quick, but the standard, you guys have been awesome. You personally, you probably changed my life, and I'll just stop at that and let's move on to the question. So the last, I want to say last 2 weeks, it's been especially difficult. And normally the stuff that I do to kind of overcome some of the typical challenges of like getting motivated or getting started on something. So typically I can either, do a little exercise, get some music going on, something. It helps. It gets me over that hump and I can get going. But the last 2 weeks is like all the normal strategies that I use are kind of not working. And it just, so that got me thinking, like, is it maybe that I'm not just having a bad week, or is it maybe something to do with my medicine? Is there something going on there? And just like, how do you know? How can you tell if it's just a bad week or two, or is it something more?
All right. So I have a bunch of questions. So you want to know if you're just having a bad week or two, or if you might need to change your medication. So my first question is there anything different in your life that is going on now? Any new stresses, any new changes in your routine, anything like that?
No, I want to say no. Nothing that I can sense. No.
And I was also thinking, and someone put in the chat as well, the elections, which has been, drawn a lot of our attention and energy and has affected a lot of our sleep. As last week, a lot of us were waiting for those returns to come back all week long. Did that affect you?
Well, okay, I'll say this. There is a lot on my pending list that I haven't been able to clear. And that's why I think maybe it is just a bad week.
Okay.
Because there's a lot there's a lot of loops that are open right now that I've been trying to get done, but they are not getting done. So it's the piling up effect is definitely happening.
Let me add this too, because someone just put in the chat, Marion put in the chat, daylight savings time. Like that affects me almost every year, like pretty significantly.
I will say, like, once it started getting colder, definitely I started feeling more down. Recently we've had a little bit of better weather, but it definitely does. I think all those things do play a factor. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out, again, is this within the realm of normal, or is there something more? Because typically basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is, so my typical morning, like it's always a little bit tricky to get going, but once I do get going and I can kind of get into the zone, mm-hmm. I can get through and do most of what I need to do. But lately I have been finding it difficult to get into that zone and to stay in it. Like maybe I can stay in it, get into it for a little bit, but then I kind of get out of it, or then I get distracted with something.
All right, so I have one more question, and then I want to open it up to others of our panelists. How long have you been on the same dosage of medication?
I want to say I've been on the same dose pretty much since the beginning. 2 years. 2 years. Okay.
But
I'm already at like the 30 mg.
All right, and what are you taking? Adderall 30 mg of short acting or XR?
XR.
Okay. Which, by the way, is not a profoundly high dose, just so you're aware.
I thought that was like the maximum.
That is why I thought that XR wasn't good for me when I was in college, because I was prescribed what they thought was the maximum. And that's half of the maximum.
Oh.
That was kind of my response when I first saw that. I was like, oh, because you're basically getting 30. So it's basically 15 milligrams in two different doses. One's that we get pretty much right away, within, half an hour or so. And then the other one at the time release.
Okay. And does this last throughout the day, or is this done by like 5, 6 if you can in the morning?
It depends. So according to Shire, they say you should get about like 11 to 12 hours of coverage. Everybody is different. Right. I know for me, I got somewhere between 6 to 7 hours on Adderall XR. I now take my Deus, which is like Adderall XR squared. It's basically a third time release for Adderall XR. And they say you're supposed to get 16 hours out of it. I get a good 12.
So it's a longer release?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying? What you're on now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's called My Deus. And I say, my Deus, more productive when I take my Deus. Right. And there is no generic for that as of right now anyways. All right. Moira, go ahead.
So a couple things, but the first one is just to continue with what Eric was saying about medications. With people on medications, it's a bit like the idea of a coal engine on a train. Different people burn through it at different rates. So the recommended dosages it's not like other medications. Stimulants aren't like other medications where it's based on your body size or your weight or anything like that. It's got to do with your brain chemistry. And it also has to do with what is being asked of your executive function. So as an example, I'm a teacher and my dosage is less in the summer because I don't have the same requirements of me. So if you're saying you've got all these things going on and all these loops and that are open, that could be impacting it. I also really wouldn't discount the seasonal effect that people have been talking about with the time change. And I don't know what part of the world you're in, but you mentioned it getting colder. So I'm assuming there's less light.
Yes, definitely.
Right. So vitamin D, most North Americans between October and April do not get enough vitamin D. And I believe if people with ADHD, that's even more critical. And so as we age too, it's harder for the things that we could do previously if we're not getting our things our body needs to run well.
Is it helpful for you?
Yeah, no, that does make a lot of sense. I guess what I'm thinking is, so what can I do? Like, should I be looking at talking to my doctor potentially, or
always? Like anytime you're wondering about something with your medication, always talk to a doctor. Like I'll tell you what all of us here on this panel can do is we can share with you our what the research says when we know it. We can share with you our personal experience, but we are not your doctor, right? So always talk to your doctor about medications, right? Because here's the thing: everybody responds differently to different medications. Right. So it is really important if you wanted to sort of dial that in. And, if you talk to your doctor about, trying to go up a little bit, right? If you try that, you might find that, maybe you feel like it's making you feel more anxious, right? And if that's the case, then maybe it isn't that. But there is, most of us do need to do some tweaking here and there the longer we're on medication.
And the goal that sometimes doctors aren't aware of is to try the medication to a point where the benefits, where the side effects outweigh the benefits. Because if you're not feeling benefits and you're not really having side effects, then the dose is just too low.
Yep.
And a lot of medical professionals are scared to go higher because they just don't know enough about it.
All right, let's go to our next question, which is also along the same sort of lines on medication, and that is a question from Noel, who asks, "How effective do you all feel medication is for someone who has?" They say ADD. I'm assuming they're referring to ADHD and attentive type, along with anxiety to function day to day. Well, I'll tell you, it certainly helps me, and I would fit into that category.
My question for Noel is, does she know, I'm assuming from her name that she identifies as a woman, and if she has female hormones, and that those vary over the course of the month, and it increases and decreases your ADHD symptoms. So I actually take 2 different doses for that. There are other treatments, so that those days that you feel like, what did I take my medication and nothing's happening? That's a factor too.
MJ, what are your thoughts?
Well, just from my own experience, when I did start the medication, with any of the intentions that I had for the day or planning, once I started being able to do those, it helped to reduce the overall anxiety of, say, a to-do list of 100 things, or wondering, did I forget about something? And I definitely look at the medication that I take as, and I think somebody has mentioned this before, is that it's essentially a tool. It's not the the fix all. It's when I put my glasses on in the morning, I can see. So when I take my medication in the morning, it's like putting glasses on for my brain. It does vary day to day. And to Moira's point, right? Things do change throughout the month. And so those are other things to factor in. And again, it's at least for me, it's just one part of the greater toolbox to help manage ADHD and anxiety.
Yeah, because I think sometimes too, we have to look at, sometimes we feel anxious because like we know we have stuff that we're forgetting to do. It's sort of that feeling of the impending doom of, oh God, what am I forgetting? Right. And so sometimes the anxiety can actually be really helped with stimulant medication. So, with all medications, there's trial and error. You kind of got to try it and see how you respond to it. Brendan, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, it helps me get going, right? Like I just have less energy and less get up and go if I don't take my meds. And I'm also noticing recently, because I've had a couple of Sundays where I slept in and I don't take my medication after 9 a.m. because I will be up all night. So I had a couple of Sundays where I didn't wake up till like 8:30, 8:45 and just didn't get to the medication before 9 a.m. So I didn't take it. And I was kind of cranky those days. So I don't know if there's like a mood thing happening for me or whatever, but I was oddly more grumpy than usual on those days. That is playing with me at the moment too.
That happens in my house with my teenagers.
Yeah.
Their frustration tolerance is like, they're just annoyed by people more easily.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Will, what about you? What's your experience?
Yeah, I'd say definitely similar to Brendan there, that it's, it makes everything else easier. And I think that also probably is part of the grumpiness there, is that when everything isn't easier, then that's just that like every little thing has a little bit more frustration to it. So that can definitely build into that mood aspect of it. And just what I'm thinking is like, yeah, it makes everything easier. It doesn't make everything else done, but it does make it easier to get to that next step, to activate the executive function so that I can look through my task list and go, okay, this is what needs to happen next, rather than just sitting there being like, well, maybe I'll just watch one more YouTube video.
And there's one thing that, Will, you often reminded me of, and that's this really cool substance that actually helps. Like it feels like it makes your medicine work better. It's called water. Drink lots of it throughout the day. I would say like when we look at sort of that multimodal treatment for ADHD, what is the stuff that has like the biggest impact, right? I think that medication for those who it can tolerate it and works for has the biggest impact. It is like, I'm almost dumbfounded by how much of an impact like drinking enough water throughout the day can have, and how because when I don't drink enough water, and I often forget to drink enough water, like I can feel it, and it feels like my brain, like the gears in my brain are just kind of grinding to a halt. And so water, it's amazing, and it's free. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful.
And to go along with that, sleep will make your medication more effective as well. Because if you're just dead tired, it doesn't really matter how much meds you take, you're still not able to activate.
And sticking with medication real quick, Eric, you said you take Mideas.
Mm-hmm.
So when you feel it kick in, do you ever just go, Mideas on Mideas, on Mideas, on Mideas, on Mideas?
With that, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we have a really interesting question about overwhelm around shopping and making purchases. So we will be right back. Support for this podcast comes from ADHD reWired's coaching and accountability groups. We only have 9 spots left in our winter coaching groups. And if you are listening to this on Tuesday, December 8th, the deadline is tonight at 11:59 p.m. Eastern for you to submit your 45-second video. Not sure what I'm talking about? Check out the email that you should have gotten if you've signed up for our winter interest list that we sent on December 2nd, where you are explained, we were told that you need to watch a 30-minute pre-recorded presentation and then answer some questions about it. Then you send us your 45-second video And if everything checks out, we will send you a link to RSVP for your last chance to register for our final registration event on Thursday, December 10th at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. Go to coachingrewired.com and click on that red button if you are catching this on December 8th.
I decided to join this group because after getting a taste of coaching from the monthly Patreon group, I knew this was the real deal, and once a month wasn't enough. It was really comforting to know that there was someone out there who not only understood what it meant to have ADHD, but was willing to share their tips and tools while being open and honest about their own struggles. I discovered that this was the coaching I didn't know I needed, and I finally found the community that I longed to be a part of. When I was diagnosed with ADHD barely a year ago, I believed I could figure out solely on my own, and I've never been happier to be proven wrong. My biggest takeaway was that having ADHD doesn't have to be a weakness, and my strengths don't diminish who I am as an ADHD person. How I look, how I was brought up, and who I am, I too am allowed to ADHD in my own way. Being atypical in both the neurotypical world and the ADHD world is not a bad thing. It just makes me unique, and it's what makes all of us here unique, and it's something that I need to embrace more. It's up to me to define who I am and who I can be with my ADHD. What I didn't expect was how intense going through the group actually turned out to be. I didn't expect to cry. I didn't expect to make the connections that were made. And I most certainly didn't expect to discover and realize how tenacious and capable I really was. Lastly, I didn't expect to have so many stories to relate to. And it's true when Eric says we really aren't alone. Before this group, I was pridefully misguided. My ego was in the driver's seat as I maneuvered through life, resisting any openness to trusting others, taking the routes that I wanted to go down, and reading the positive signs that were blatantly trying to steer me in my direction. I was certain my flaws would continue to define me for the rest of my life, that I would barely amount to anything, and that anything I had dreamt of or had plans for were not worth pursuing. No more. The roadmap is there. I know how to make it, and now I'm going to follow it. And now I realize my aspirations are not stupid or silly or a waste of time, nor am I stupid or silly or a waste of life. It took finding this group to discover that I can do hard things, we can do hard things. And it was absolutely incredible to witness the growth of my teammates and to be a part of their journeys and to have them be a part of mine. Accountability doesn't have to be unpleasant or sticky or thorny, because with the right people, we can accomplish more than we'd ever thought possible. So it's also true that no one succeeds alone. This group is like finding missing pieces to a puzzle that you didn't know were missing. Now I can finish my puzzle, put that one away, admire it for the work that was put into it, and finally move on to the next puzzle. And if you're thinking about joining this group, really and truly, the only thing I can say is go for it. I hesitated the first time I considered joining, and my only qualm now is that I didn't start sooner. This is a group for ADHDers by an ADHDer. I am better because of it. All of us here are better because of it. And if I could do it again, you can bet I would in a heartbeat.
Check the website for up-to-date information about registration. If you're new to this podcast, I'm glad that you're here. Our coaching groups fill up fast every season. This group is not for everyone. To find out if you would be a good fit for ADHD reWired's coaching and accountability groups, go to coachingrewired.com. Registration is by invitation only. Winter sessions begin January 6th, and it all begins at coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back, and super news for everyone. Moira's audio is going to sound so much better now, and I'm sure everyone else is going to say it just bothered me. But for anyone else who has my kind of ears, Moira's now actually talking from her microphone. Okay. All right, let's, Lauren asks how to avoid overwhelm when researching / shopping for big, important purchases, like a car, for example. I tend to put these off until the absolute last minute because I find the information overload so overwhelming. So in the end, my decision is rushed. Ooh, really. And someone just wrote in the chat, and I want to like second and third that, spreadsheets. So earlier in the year, our washer like just died. And so I was like, oh my God, like this is something that I could spend a lot of time researching. I got onto Consumer Reports and some other stuff. I immediately created some spreadsheets. Within 2 hours, I had a decision. I went into Apps, which is at a local electronics store. I went into Apps. I was in and out in like 15 minutes. It was insane. I'm still kind of reeling in that. It was pretty awesome.
I do something very similar. Like even I need some winter gloves that are touch screen. And so I Google reviews. And so I do it when I'm lying on the couch, I'm watching TV. I can drift in and out of it. I narrow it down that way. Sometimes we do artificial. We actually bought a timeshare because that limits where we can look for holidays. And we fly only using points. So we create artificial narrowing of the options to make it less overwhelm. And I have extremely large feet. And that has limited my shoe shopping ability. And I realized that the fact that there's 2 places that I can go to, I actually really like that now. I may not get the coolest shoes, but so if there's ways that you can artificially narrow it and maybe spread it out so it's not like if you know that there's something coming up rather than avoiding it, doing it in smaller bits, that research if you like to do it, and or finding people just to ask.
MJ has to look for her shoes in smaller bits.
I have to wear a kid size 2.5 or 3.
They could probably make 3 pairs of shoes out of mine for you.
I could fit my shoe in your shoe.
Oh, definitely. I can't wait till MJ and I can meet in person, the Canadian contingent on our international panel, because I think there's a foot difference in our height.
It's going to be like when Eric and I met. Because Eric's like 1 billion feet tall.
So we got to get like a picture of all of us just lined up. I think Will's the tallest of all of us. Will, how tall are you?
6'1", 6'1"
and a half. You're about the same height as me. All right. Yeah, but I think that's a really good, Moira, what you're saying about having these sort of rule out, criteria. And it's what's interesting is one of the things that makes decisions hard is when things are similar, right? I think I brought this up on a previous, podcast before. I was kind of new to getting into doing ADHD stuff professionally. And I was at my very first CHAD conference and I was just starting my business. And I was in a session with the author of ADD Friendly Ways to Organize Your Life, whose name is in my brain, but not coming out. We'll think of it in a few moments. And she had said that she had a client who was literally spent 10 years trying to decide what color file cabinet to get, either the like tan or the darker tan. And I'm like, she has been in my Amazon like shopping history. She has been watching what I am doing because I have spent the last 6 months deciding what kind of file cabinet to get. And it was between like 3 almost identical, was like just a slight variation on the wood color. And she said something to me that was so helpful. If the choices you're making are really similar, the pros and cons are about the same. So just flip a coin or go with what's cheapest.
Are you trying to figure out what is the right one?
Ooh, yeah, because the right one versus good enough. Laura says yes, right? Because there's the right one sounds like perfectionism, where we got to go with the right. There's an idea that I really like. It's the idea that you make a decision and you just make it the right one. And yes, Brett, thank you. Judith Kohlberg is her name. I couldn't think of the person's name, man. So yeah, making it the right one once you choose. Yeah, the paradox of choice. I remember being a kid and like every Friday, my dad would take me to the bakery. Do you know how hard that choice was? Like, cause I wanted them all and I could only get one. I mean, I got stressed out from it. Like I have very visceral memories of like, oh my God, like what if I'm going to pick the wrong one? Do I want the chocolate long john this time? Or is it going to be the sweet roll that has like the yummy chocolate glaze thing on it? And any of those, if someone would have handed me any of the items said, here you go, I'd be like, sweet, this is so good.
And that's when just doing this, getting more of the same, right? Lauren talked about buying a car. Well, if there's a brand that you like, then limit it to that. If there's find ways to narrow it down so that you're not having that whole selection. But yeah, just the repeat purchase is one of my favorite. Don't you have Kleenex on demand at your, yeah.
I have lots of things on demand.
If I can circle back to the idea of the like overwhelm of research and all that stuff, because I don't use the same strategy. So I want to share it a little bit different. First, I married well. So oftentimes my wife is the one doing this. And it's not because I can't do the research. It's because usually I don't care, including like washers and dryers and stuff, right? And if I do care, it's only because I went there and saw it. So no matter what I research on the internet, I'm not going to get excited about it until I'm physically in the same place as that item. So whatever. On that end, I kind of have to go and look, which means I outsource a lot of this. Like I kind of have a vague idea of like, this stuff seems good and I want it to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And then I go talk to the people at the store because they know more than I do. And yeah, they want to sell me, but I have an idea of my budget and that stuff to kind of barrier things a little bit. And the other piece of what I do is like, my wife and I kind of have roles in the decision making of big purchases. Because she gets motivated by the research and kind of needs to do it. It's a piece of how she manages the anxiety of it. And I don't care. And that's a piece of how I manage the anxiety of it. So when we get to the actual, now we're deciding stuff and we're talking about this thing or this thing or this thing, I pay attention to the one that my wife is the most anxious about getting, the one she thinks is just a little too expensive. And then it's my job to tell her that's totally the one we should get. And it's not a big deal. And we can afford the extra $75 because usually that's the one she wants. And she always just doesn't quite want to spend that much money. So there's also that like emotional management element of the process for me. But that's kind of how big purchases work in my house and for me.
Brendan, Jen just pointed out in the chat that what we all really need is just to marry your wife.
My wife's awesome. She has the sexiest executive functions.
I'm wondering if you could do a little training course on that last piece. The encouragement to get the one that she wants and to spend that money. Because I just would sign my husband up for that course.
Yeah. It's a lot of it's like, yeah, no, that one.
Because I'm doing what your wife is doing with the EF dysfunction with the accountant husband, right? So.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, see. You know. My wife is there's your problem, right? Like when the numbers person and the sort of like structured person is the one worrying about the money and the person who isn't is the one trying to buy the thing, that doesn't fly. That doesn't work. It's got to be the person who doesn't care that is the like, nah, just spend the money.
All right, let's do one more question here before we go to our next break. I want to take a question from Allison. Looking for ways to manage or avoid getting stuck in waiting periods. For example, if I have an appointment I need to leave for in a couple hours, I'll get ready in 10 minutes and then get stuck, not be able to do anything else. It feels like the opposite of running late or distracted version of time blindness. Time hyperfocus, maybe? Thoughts on this?
Word. I feel personally attacked.
Say more.
Like if I have a significant thing happening in a day, that's the thing I'm doing that day. And it doesn't have to take up the whole day, right? Like I ran workshops on Thursday and Friday and Saturday. Saturday I had two of them, sort of. One of them was a D&D game. But Thursday and Friday, my workshops were at 3:00, both days, 3:00 to 5:00. And it was hard for me to do anything other than prep for those workshops, even when I had them prepped. Like I didn't really need to do prep, but I was like, I feel like I should look at my slides or whatever. And then sort of like whatever little things needed to happen. But I couldn't be like, well, why don't I just edit a podcast for 4 hours before this workshop launches? And then yay, like that wasn't it. I could do sort of impulsive things like, oh, we need milk. I'll go to the store and get milk. Like I could do that kind of stuff. But anything that is sort of planning, I feel like I'm in a waiting room and I'm like, I can't, nope, that's my brain didn't want to let me do that. So I totally get it. And then there's that pain of like, okay, I got to do the thing at 3:00. What am I doing now? Like, I'm just kind of waiting for 3:00 to come across and punch me in the face so I can start doing whatever's happening. And it's painful. And it's like distraction stuff. I want my kids to be like, Dad, this, or I think I played some Zelda to occupy some time, if I'm being honest. But it was a lot of that impulsivity interrupt stuff.
MJ, what do you do?
When there's like a long waiting period and there's nothing planned in between. Well, I was putting in the chat and just calling myself out, picking up a sock that's been sitting over there for longer than I want to admit. And somehow every time I clean my desk, I still end up with 3 or 4 mugs of different beverages every single time. And I pass by the kitchen, more than a few times, and it theoretically is easy for me to bring them up, but I forget. So it's another thing that I can do to fill my time if I'm, waiting for my car to warm up because it's winter now and there's about a couple feet of snow outside. Oh my gosh. And yeah, so there's little things that they could be easy, but they're just not because ADHD. And so at least if I can clear up a small space like my desk, then when I get home from the office, at least it's clean when I get home. So that's just extra little things that I can theoretically do if I remember to do them. Or if the cluttered space is just bothering me enough that I will do it while I'm waiting.
All right, let's do this. Let's take one more quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get through as many more of these questions as we can. So we will be right back. Did you know that listeners like you can support this podcast by becoming a patron? Just go to ADHDrewired.com and click on the Patreon tab at the top of the page. I want to thank Till You for becoming a patron last week at the $2 a month level, and Sam S who became a patron last week at the $10 a month level. Thank you to all of our new and longtime patrons who help support me and my team. Whatever you can give, I appreciate it. And when you support ADHD Rewired on Patreon, you can get cool perks starting at just $5 a month. All of our $25 a month patrons can join me for a group coaching call on Tuesday, December 22nd at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. We do these every 4th Tuesday of the month. And if you can give just $10 a month, you can have access to the recordings of these patron coaching calls. And would you pay just $5 a month for ad-free episodes? If so, there is a poll on our Patreon page at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Go there and vote. We are going to keep that up until the end of the year. If you find value in this podcast and this community and everything else we do, and you are able to, because we know this has been a tough year for a lot of people, if you are able to, become a patron. All of your support is appreciated. To become a patron, go to ADHDrewired.com and click on that Patreon tab at the top of the page. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thanks. If you are new to ADHD Rewired, welcome. I want to let you know about our other podcasts that we have here on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. If you are looking for a 15-minute podcast full of tips, dry humor, and a few dad jokes, check out Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb. This week, Will's talking about automations to help manage your ADHD. And if you would like to ask Will a question, go to hackingyyouradhd.com and scroll down to the Start Recording button. Record a question and submit it, and he might answer your question on his podcast. That's hackingyyouradhd.com. And for conversations like these with a focus on kids, check out ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan. And coming in 2021, we got 2 new podcasts that are going to be joining the ADHD Rewired podcast family. Be on the lookout for ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens and the ADHD Friendly Lifestyle with Moira Maybin. Come join me and all of our members of the ADHD Rewired podcast family for our last live Q&A of 2020, which is today. If today is Tuesday, December 8th, we're doing it at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And if you're listening to it after that, we do these every second Tuesday of the month at the same time. To register for our live Q&A, go to ADHDrewired.com facebook.com/events. And to everyone who has applied to join our Facebook community in the last 2 months or so and have not gotten a response back from us, it's not you, it's us. We're just behind. We haven't forgotten about you. We appreciate your patience as we process all of your applications. If you want to join our secret Facebook community, it'll be worth the wait. Go to ADHDrewired.com/community. Oh, and for those of you who listen to audiobooks on Audible, you can now listen to your favorite ADHD Rewired Podcast Network podcasts there too. You can also leave a rating and review on there as well, which would be super helpful as we are now new to that platform. And if you are not on Audible, but you'd like to check it out, you can also get a free audiobook by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. All right, we are back and we have Autumn here who's trying to get her, sounds like son, to be quiet while she asks this next question.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to get a parent support group started for my kids' school. And I just was like, anybody have any tips on getting some engagement? Because it's only a week. I've only gotten about 8 people in the group. So I got to work on building the group a little bit more and getting it out to other parents. But kind of helping, kind of encouraging them, my whole goal is to encourage them and helping their kids.
All right. So I think that Brendan and I might be having the same exact thought, because when you said,
I think we are.
When you said I only have 8 people involved and you just started this, Autumn, I think you have a successful group right now. Like that's getting 8. I mean, I know lots of people who do try to create support groups who it's months before they get anyone to even come.
Yeah. Well, I already had talked to a couple of moms, and so I've got them and my husband and the teacher who does educational support. She's already in there, and me and my husband.
Great.
But it's at least a start.
Absolutely. And so there are also, I mean, you don't have to invent this wheel, right? Like this has been created. You can go to, whether you want it to be something like Chad, they have resource manuals on how to start a chapter. And you can sort of adapt it if it's not just for ADHD. I'm sure that there's lots of stuff that you can just Google on how to start a support group. Meetup.com can be a great place to get a support group going. Brendan, what else you got? You're
working through a school, right?
Yes, I'm going through the school. My purpose is right at the school.
So there are in Massachusetts, they're called CPACs. They might have different names in other places. It might be called like a special education parent teacher organization or something. But there are effectively special ed PTOs that exist. Your school system might already have it. It's usually at the system level, not at the individual school level. So that might be a place to network and connect with. And also, because I've done my part to build CPACs in the past, and you are a member of this audience, send me an email and I will be a guest virtual speaker for you to talk about ADHD. And that will maybe draw some folks in to I can learn about ADHD and then you can talk about the group and that'll maybe add some butts in virtual seats.
Okay. This is a private school that I'm working within. So, okay. But yeah, I will definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah. It's Brendan at ADHDessentials.com.
Yep. I'm in your Facebook group. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah. Let me know.
Awesome. All right. Let's go. Does any of you have another question that you would like to answer?
Let's do this one from Aaron. Anyone have a resource for spouses and family members who are neurotypical, something that we can share with our others so they can quickly understand a little about us?
Yes. Adhd has, the Adult ADHD organization, has a peer-to-peer support group specifically for the non-ADHD partner. I believe Mike Fidel chairs that group. So if you go to, I think it's ADD, just type in the Adult, because I know that there's like another organization that I keep typing in that it's like some engineering website. It's not that one. So I think it's adhd.org. And then look under like groups or resources. And I think they meet monthly, ADDA. So it's the Adult ADD organization, Adults Attention Deficit Disorder Association.
Yeah. And the videos of How to ADHD that Jessica puts out are phenomenal and great for perspective. Any of these podcasts that you're listening to are useful. There's a book that I like to recommend, and I don't want to offend people, so hear me out on this. The title of it is The Survival Guide to Kids with ADHD. So if you're talking about like a husband or a wife or something, and they're going to be like, kids, like I recommend kids books for beginning non-fiction learning because it's such an easy primer. Kids books are easy primers that have a lot of really good information, but they don't fall down rabbit holes that are boring and stupid. They just hit the important bits and you move on. And then you can read a more complicated book later if you want, because you've got a solid foundation from the kid book. I recommend this book to literally everybody, and I have yet to have anyone complain about it. It's got a red cover, and it's written by John F. Taylor. So it totally a great book. And then there's folks, this is a service I do, but I'm not necessarily pushing myself. But there are coaches and people out there who can give you an overview of ADHD in a way that helps neurotypicals kind of get it when they don't. So that's another sort of consultation service that I can't be the only one who does it. So that's out there too.
All right, let's go to another question. Let's see here. Let's go to Margaret. Margaret asks, I am a 47-year-old and have tried to pursue a possible ADHD diagnosis 2 times. However, I have not been successful in this diagnosis. Each time I feel discouraged to get this diagnosis. I have struggled with disorder and disorganization and failing off track all my life. There are times that I have been able to get back on track, but slowly find myself off track again. What do you recommend? There's a lot in that question. So I'm not sure if you sought the diagnosis but didn't get it because like you actually went through the evaluation, or was it that you missed the appointments? And I'm not making a joke. Like this happens more often. I mean, it's not a surprise. We have ADHD. We miss our appointments. So I'm not really sure kind of what happened where you weren't successful in the diagnosis. A lot of the strategies per se are, whether you have ADHD or not, are helpful for everybody. So if you really look at from the element of just strategy based living or living an ADHD friendly lifestyle, that whether or not you formally or officially have that diagnosis, the strategies can be helpful. Where the diagnosis would be helpful for many of us is for medication purposes. So, the thing with any evaluation or ADHD, I want to encourage anyone who's considering that diagnosis is to talk to somebody who actually specializes in ADHD, because I think not doing so often does more harm than good. Any of you want to add to that, Moira?
I just pulled up something that I had taken from a Attitude magazine, and it was about increasing the chances of getting a diagnosis if you're a woman for clinicians. And so a lot of times the diagnosis focuses on a behavior model of like what your behavior is. But if you're able to speak about what the impairments are in your life, because that is how, as an adult, there's more impairments. So what are the things that are really difficult for you to do? And then also looking at, them being able to look at the internalized things that happen specifically with women. So if you're able to learn about how ADHD, as children for women, like if you were hyperverbal, that's a sign. And then so you're able to speak to, but having, someone who really understands that, and has that kind of information is super important.
Okay. And, Brandon, not to be confused with Brendan, had a similar question that hits kind of a little bit of a different point on this, and that they're looking for a place to get an official ADHD diagnosis. He said he was told by a few friends that he has ADHD, that he might have it too. And, say what you will, but I think that people with ADHD tend to be pretty damn good diagnosticians of other people with ADHD. I have no actual data to back up that claim. So I'll just say that. But, when we've lived life out these eyes our entire life, it's really, I think, kind of easy to spot. Like if you are talking to someone, not always, but well,
it's just like when you go into those like groups. Like when I was like in your the coaching group, it was like you go there and you're like, oh, everybody's like me. And you like see that mirroring effect.
Yes.
People with ADHD has that same thing where they're like, you're kind of like, I see you in me. I think you're probably, this is why.
For sure. So part of that question, so all of the other research I've done points to having ADHD. Do I need an official diagnosis for ADHD, or if the tips and information I found to be helpful, should I keep going the way you're going? That's really a choice for you to make. If when we look at any diagnosis, we have to have impairment, right? And so if there's everything is a struggle and you're really struggling with day-to-day functioning, maybe look into it. I think too, there's also, and I've worked with so many people who have said they'll try medication as a last resort. The research would really argue against that idea and say try it first, because like you'll know pretty quickly. And the thing that I've seen like too often is where someone tries medication as a last resort, and then they're like, "Why didn't I try this sooner?" Right. So it's kind of one of those things like just test the water to see if you like it, see if it feels, cause I think, you'll know if it feels the way your brain kind of wants to feel, the way it was designed to feel. All right. Let's go to another question. Tess asks, any recommendations on how to manage RSD, which is rejection sensitive dysphoria, especially in relationships? And so the first thing I want to say about this before we kind of get into a discussion on RSD, is that the research is still not real solid on RSD. It's really interesting because if we look at any Facebook group where they're talking about, RSD, and so many people seem to resonate with it. Right. So I think that's something, but like, what is it really? Is it, it's very possible that it's something else. And so if we're calling something one thing, but it's actually something else, are we then like turning our back onto a lot of data and research that already exists where the treatments could be helpful? We know that rejection being the key thing of our RSD, well, rejection is also, or perceived rejection is also one of the main triggers in borderline personality disorder, right? So like, which one is it? So I just think it's really important to recognize that while there are certain sort of these labels or diagnoses that are helpful in the sense that they are validating for our lived experience, where it's not helpful is that it doesn't really give us ideas for what do we do? Right. So I think that's a really important thing a distinction to kind of, separate.
Adding to that, one of the interesting things that I heard this weekend at CHAD was the notion that if you are combined typed or have hyperactive, the presentation of ADHD, that really is your system is in hyperarousal, and that hyperarousal can be a factor for the experiences that RSD, that people sort of group together, and that there has been really good results for people adding a non-stimulant to their stimulant medication in managing that hyperarousal, because it can help with things like, instead of having 3 to 5 thoughts coming at once, you're having one thought and it's the thought that you want. And, so that would be one aspect of it. But then there's also that it does help a bit with the emotional regulation that people can sort of feel like is, RSD.
And someone in the chat too also put that for them it could look identical to PTSD. Yeah, absolutely. Like anytime that we are, and I'll mention this too, that like with trauma, I think I mentioned this possibly the last Q&A, because I had started then. I'm doing this 26-hour trauma training for psychotherapists, and it's one of these things like once you start to realize what something really is, you start to see so many things differently, right? And trauma is kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, if you just know the surface stuff of trauma, you don't know anything about trauma. So, I think it's important that we are looking at these things and we are discussing these things, but we need to really apply rigorous scientific study to really have a better idea about these things. Otherwise, sometimes it could do more harm than good. You think about things like, there was a doctor out there who has the 6 or 7 types of ADHD. Like, I think that's super unhelpful. Right? Because it's like you're actually describing a bunch of other disorders, not ADHD. Right? And so it's going to prevent people from getting the actual help that will actually help them. So yeah, science matters.
Can I pull out of the philosophical and jump into some practical on this one? So stuff that helps me, who is a person that gets thrown off by rejection on occasion. If I am going into a conversation and I know that rejection might be a piece of it, I prep myself in advance for what am I going to do if that happens, right? How am I going to handle it? And oftentimes that allows me to then have that conversation in a way that is more balanced and helps me circumvent the possibility of being rejected anyway. But prepping for it in advance is useful. And so too, I spent some time in the course of building my business where I just put myself out there a lot to be rejected because I had to. And that exposure therapy, although inadvertent and sort of by happenstance, also played a big role in my ability to navigate being rejected, because I just got rejected a lot because not everybody wanted to hear what I had to say. So that those sorts of things can be helpful too. And I'm not going to recommend that you just go out there and start finding ways to get rejected. That's not a plan. But if you
could,
have
though,
a reason,
I mean,
you could.
Jai Zhang, who we had on the podcast many years ago, that was what he did and wrote the book Rejection Proof, and he was on. Right. He did a TED Talk all about that. It's I mean, you
can go to McDonald's and be like, "Can I have a Big Mac for $1?" and set yourself like, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't go there and do it in a way that's going to get you to be a jerk. But that's true. Yeah, there are folks out there, and I've read that book. That is a choice.
And Brendan, also like the whole notion of that, you know that it's likely that you're going to have those emotions, because I'm very similar that way, and sort of trying to separate that, having that emotion with what I do with it. And my daughter, who's sort of been like how do I manage ADHD successfully since I was a late diagnosis, is kind of my work project for that. She's 14. And the other night we were talking about having, not being able to have her friends over because, who are in her bubble, because our COVID rating has gone higher. And so we came up with a solution that worked, but she was still sitting at the table looking very upset. And my husband was like, "What's going on?" And she said, "I'm okay with this outcome, but I still have the feelings that when I was like not going to get my outcome. So I just need some time." And her dad and I were just like, okay. So it's like taking that power away from it by knowing what it is, and then having ways that you can that you can cope with it is hugely helpful.
I think just to put a nail on that, just the idea, just because we feel it doesn't mean it's true. Right. And so it's really understanding some of that emotional regulation piece that, feelings are not facts. Like we can, yes, it's a fact you're having a strong feeling, but the meaning you are putting behind that doesn't necessarily make it a fact because you're feeling something really strongly. All right. We have time for one, possibly two more here. So let's, what do we got?
Got a good one here that I think would be beneficial for everyone from Bucky. Hope I'm saying that right. How do you organize everything so it has a place, and how do you maintain it?
Shit, if I know.
And if you're like me, you're like, then a week later, you're like, oh, but I'm changing it. And when I was a teacher, the kids would be like, where do I find the paper now? Oh, it's over here.
Hire a professional organizer, get help, try to keep things as simple as possible. Good enough, go for good enough. Know that the idea of getting yourself organized, just take the D off of that, cause it's a constant process. Cause unless you're organizing a art exhibit, which you just look at and don't actually touch or interact with, it's a constant process. And I think so much more of organization with ADHD is not even so much of how do you kind of get your systems organized, but how do you not walk away from that piece of paper you just put down with every intention to come back to put that away in 10 seconds that we never do. Right.
Yeah.
Cause that's where the messes and the piles come from. I'm going to put this down, go drop off this thing. And then I'm going to assume my working memory is going to hold on to the fact that I put something down that I was planning on coming back to. And it just never, it doesn't. So,
and also buy duplicates intentionally instead of buying them accidentally, right? If you need a hammer on your tool bench and you need a hammer in a drawer in your kitchen, just buy a hammer and put it in your kitchen drawer so that you don't end up not knowing where your hammer is. And there's one in your kitchen drawer and there's one underneath the microwave and there's another one in the cabinet in the laundry room for some reason.
Brendan, if you have a label maker, put what room that hammer goes on. It's the kitchen hammer. It's it's the bathroom hammer. What do we need a hammer?
I need a bathroom hammer. Isn't that how you unclog a toilet? Right.
I was going to say sometimes maybe you're just shitting bricks and you need a hammer. I don't know. The things that I debate in my head, if there's a thought, is it going to come out of my mouth? Yep, it came out of my mouth. That's what happens. All right. I don't know. Should we end on that one? And Will, do you have an organizational strategy?
One other thing just for organization is what another big reason we're not organized is we just have too much stuff. It's overwhelming to be I have to put all of this away. And I've definitely noticed this with my kids when we go through and cull the toys. Magically, our house doesn't get as messy because there's not toys everywhere. And then, we get more and more toys again. And then suddenly the house is getting messy all the time again. Getting rid of stuff really helps with the being able to put stuff away.
And if you have kids, when they're younger, you can do it, pre-COVID when they're not there. And then when they're like, where's the thing? You're like, I don't know. When was the last time you saw it? Because you got rid of it, but they don't. So you can just be like, where'd you leave it? Because especially if they have ADHD.
Your kids are going to listen to this and be scarred. They're like, oh. They know now. But I
also try to do seasonal purges, right? Move things from season to season and just to make it easier to get rid of stuff.
Yeah. Have you ever done the monthly declutter challenge where it's on day 1 of a month, you get rid of one thing, day 2, 2 things, day 3, 3 things. I think by the end of the 31-day month, it's 438 or 60 something. It's a really large amount. I have done that twice. Neither time I've done it fully, but I've done the intention of it and got rid of a lot of stuff. My main pre-ADHD diagnosis 3 years ago coping strategy was to have everything organized all of the time, which nearly killed me. So I'm actually learning how to be more okay with mess. So here's what I'm going to ask everyone. So this podcast comes out in December. So we're speaking to the future now. What do you want to share about how to maybe wrap up this year and get ready for the next. And I'm putting all of you on the spot to come up with something so pithy.
To wrap up 2020 and get ready for 21. That's what you're asking?
That's what I'm asking.
I got mine. I got to clear my unreplied to emails.
Okay.
I think I misunderstood the question. Can we try it again? Do you remember the question, Eric?
It's questionable. The question, no. Moira, I don't think you did misunderstand the question.
Okay.
So I want like
maybe I did and I set a bad example.
Totally, it's okay because it was a good idea.
I liked your answer. I'm like, that's more achievable for me.
So we're sort of just giving a word of wisdom, a little, I don't love to say advice, but maybe just some guidance.
Oh, like big picture stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I was too specific.
Well, I got something then.
All right.
Which is, I still want to plan my 2021, but I want to reduce my expectations, which was a goal for this year. But I think I can further be like, these are the directions I want to go, and less, this is the exact thing I want to do. So setting my course rather than setting my destination.
Okay. Have you thought of a theme yet? Or are you still thinking about that?
Yeah, and haven't thought about that one too hard yet.
Okay. Moira?
I'm going to piggyback on Will's. I'm going to continue and would love other people to practice acceptance of having ADHD and that I am going to get distracted by shiny things and that sometimes makes things harder, and to be compassionate to myself and others. So practicing compassion. And that often happens by doing less. I have more bandwidth. I think we have more bandwidth when we do less to be flexible. That's what I wish for all of us.
Brendan? This is your mulligan.
Because I haven't said it yet. We are living through a global pandemic, and that's not going to change by January. And also, it's getting cold, and it's going to continue to get cold for a while before it gets warmer. So figure out and plan your adventures now. Figure out what you can do outside with your kids, socially distance with your friends, with your spouse, with whoever it is in your family that matters or your circle of socialness that matters. Come up with adventures that will get you out of the house that you have already spent too much time in. And depending on where you live, you're going to spend more time in it because it's going to be cold. So I know we're not good at planning, but like Atlas Obscura is a great resource. Only in Your State is a great resource. Find some websites that have interesting things in and around you and get out of the house, even if you need to wear a scarf.
Awesome. MJ, what about you?
Something didn't help me this year. I'm not bringing it into next year. And there was a quote that I had written down the other day, which I will be reminding myself of. And I don't know if this is helpful, but it is still helpful for me. It's a quote by Francis Bacon. Natural abilities are like natural plants that need pruning by study. So just going into the next year with that consistent growth mindset. And I think a really big thing that a lot of us can focus on is what we've learned this year and how resilient we're going to be next year. Because this year was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I would say that I think about this year. This is a year that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But I'm here, and while certainly tired, and there's been a lot of things this year that I've been personally challenged by. I think that this year was a screaming example of that I can do hard things. And so looking into 2021, I think sort of acknowledging that there's going to be some tiredness, and not like just the day-to-day tiredness, but like, as Brendan likes to remind us on every monthly Q&A, We are going through a pandemic, and it's not a quick one. And so that, plus a bunch of other things in my life that have been just kind of changing. So I think that this is going to be 2021 will be a year of rebuilding. So with that, I want to thank everyone for being here. And Moira, MJ, Will, Brendan, it is great to have all of you here together as we are growing this podcast family. It's so fun. And thank you everyone who asked questions. And if you were here for the first time, thanks for being here. If you come here every month, we are so happy that you are here. And we do this every second Tuesday of the month at the same time, same place. So we'll see you in 2021. That's for the podcast people. It's weird talking to two people at the same time in two different times. Let's just cue the outro. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is adhdrewired.com. You can find summaries and additional resources for each episode. You can apply to our free and secret Facebook community. You can learn more about ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups, and sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. It's all at adhdrewired.com. While you're there, click the Patreon button. If you're a regular listener and you're still listening to my voice, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron through our Patreon page. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to listeners, but it is not free to produce. And patrons get really cool perks. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD Rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. You can also subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube. And you can subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube and see select interviews and some other videos I've posted. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends and your family and your clients, as well as your coaches, therapists, and doctors. And if you're a coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader, and you would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at my website, adhdrewired.com. And if you're a member of CHAD or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this podcast. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. You know, you might be the person that turns somebody on to a podcast for the very first time. And if you really love this episode, please consider hitting share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I count on you to help me spread the message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and to help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or any other podcast app that accepts ratings and reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe on this podcast on your podcast app so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Not sure where to start? In no particular order. Check out Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, 10% Happier, and Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. These are both by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions and Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Do you have trouble asking for help? Listen to The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. It's one of the best produced audiobooks I've ever heard. If you're looking for something a little bit more, say, magical, I unexpectedly fell in love with the Harry Potter series. And I don't usually listen to those kinds of books, and I loved it. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brené Brown bus yet, check out Brené Brown's books, starting with The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader in any capacity, check out her 2018 book, Dare to Lead. And Brene still is my most wanted guest, so if you know Brene, and you would be so kind to make that connection for me, I would be really, really grateful. You know who else I would like to have on the show? You. Click the podcast tab at ADHDrewired.com and then click the Be a Guest button at the top of that page and schedule a 15-minute pre-interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting. Self-care is not selfish, and no matter what gets done or doesn't get done, at the end of the day, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.